When you're ready.
Economics of testing on the human genome with an ethical analysis. Okay. People have been using gene tampering for thousands of years, with farmers in the Andes first using selective breeding, which is when a farmer saves the best crops to plant the following year to maximize yields. In more recent years, farmers and scientists have perfected quicker and more efficient ways to selective breed, such as injecting foreign DNA into plants to create GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. The innovations in genetic engineering do not end there, with new findings coming very often ever since the creation of CRISPR, which uses the Cas9 protein to cut out the bad genes and put in the preferable genes. These new technologies can now be transferred to the human genome, where we should continue to experiment but be very cautious and do not take action with the technology until it has been thoroughly tested. One way that CRISPR has been used recently on the human genome is to treat sickle cell disease, where patients have blood cells that are longer and clot easier. This treatment was first used on Victoria Gray, who was in her early 30s and had suffered from sickle cell disease for a while. And then she was treated with CRISPR gene editing. Some major drawbacks that are preventing this treatment to be widespread is that it costs $2 million per patient, and we do not quite know what the effects are. The sickle cell treatment is not yet ethical because it violates justice, which states that the treatment must be fair and equitable, and the price tag is anything but fair and equitable. So when the price for treating sickle cell disease with gene editing is decreased, it therefore becomes economical and ethical. Genetic diseases have been a major problem in the world, with an estimated 10% of people having a genetic defect in 2012, and it's estimated that it costs the US between $14 and $57 billion and countless resources to deal with genetic disorders in children. Now, with the progression of genetic editing, scientists are beginning to predict that sometime in the next 10 years that they will be able to genetically edit genes into embryos and remove any genetic disorders. When this becomes possible, it will be very expensive at first, like the sickle cell treatment, but the economic upside is tremendous, with billions of dollars possibly being saved. Although in the future it will be profitable, that does not cover the entire picture. With genetically editing embryos is completely ethically wrong because they do not have a say in if they're genetically edited. When removing genetic or disorders from embryos becomes widely available and relatively cheap to compare to genetic engineering today, the positives will outweigh the negatives. Another type of genetic modification that could happen inside the embryo has been named designer babies. Designer babies will be when people take genetic modification to the extreme and change the features of babies, such as appearance, IQ, and health. Designer babies are not yet possible and are outlawed by many countries, including the US. Because of their questionable ethics, because designer babies take genetic modifications of embryos to the extreme, the price to have your child become one will be extremely expensive, which most of the population will not be able to afford them. Genetically modified babies are also ethically questionable because the procedure will be on an embryo that cannot decide for itself. It will not likely be widely available in the next 10 years, but when it does, it most likely looks like that the positives will not outweigh the negatives. Overall, genetic editing has a lot of potential, and if it becomes profitable and does not violate any of the tenets, it should be performed.
Thank you. PJ, a couple of questions. How did some preliminary information you gathered guide your research?
Well, early on, we learned about how you could genetically modify an embryo, and it first started off with just taking away some diseases, or even bacteria. You can just take away stuff, and then it really progressed into designer babies and making an entirely new human from DNA.
Okay. Another question. What additional questions emerged from your research, and why are they important?
The question really is like, how are we gonna say, like, because we're gonna probably eventually have to genetically modify a baby to take away genetic disorders, and when will we deem that the positives outweigh the negatives because they can't talk for themselves?
Okay, all right. Thank you. Another round of applause.